The fluorescent lights of the police station flickered like a warning, casting sharp shadows across the stark white walls. Nia Thompson sat in the holding cell, her wrists cuffed, her mind a storm of rage and humiliation. Only hours ago, she had been dragged into that same station, mocked, and forced into the most degrading experience of her life. Two officers, laughing like children at a cruel joke, had pinned her down while another snatched scissors from the counter. Just a trim, one sneered. Nia had stared at them in disbelief, her pride burning hotter than the indignity itself. The first snip had been sharp, deliberate, a cut not just through her hair, but through the very essence of her identity. She could feel each strand fall to the cold linoleum, her dignity scattered along with it. They laughed louder, egged on by each other, unaware that with every laugh, a fire was being lit in Nia that would not be extinguished. She had always been quiet, cautious, someone who measured every word and every step. But the way those cops had treated her, the way they had laughed at her humanity, had shifted something deep inside. In that cell, the humiliation transformed into a fierce determination. She could almost taste it, a sweetness to the revenge that would come. Nia had grown up watching her mother fight battles no one else could understand, learning that patience was a weapon and timing was everything. Now, she knew exactly how to channel that patience. She would not be a victim. She would be the force that no one expected, the storm that arrived silent and precise. When the charges were finally dropped, thanks to a combination of a technicality and public outcry, Nia left the police station like a ghost. The officers who had laughed at her were unaware that their actions had sown the seeds of a reckoning they would never see coming. For weeks, she planned in the shadows. She studied the courthouse, memorized the schedules, understood the routines of the very system that had once humiliated her. She found a way in not as a trespasser or vigilante, but through the legitimate lawful path that would give her the power to make them feel the weight of every snip, every taunt, every laugh that had echoed off the walls of that station. Nia Thompson was about to transform from prey into judge, jury, and executioner, not in anger, but in cold, calculated justice. And yet, as she walked through the quiet streets toward her law school for the first time, there was a question that haunted her mind, a question she could not ignore even in her darkest plotting. Could a woman who had been humiliated so deeply ever truly find peace in revenge, or would she be swallowed by the very bitterness she intended to inflict? The thought lingered, but Nia pressed on, knowing that doubt was just another tool to sharpen her focus, not weaken it. By the time she finished her degree, Nia had built herself a reputation for integrity, brilliance, and unshakable composure. People trusted her instinctively. They never suspected the storm that brewed beneath her calm exterior. And when the day came that she was sworn in as a judge, the power she now held was absolute in the very realm where the officers who had humiliated her once ruled unchecked. Nia's first months on the bench were ordinary to the public eye. She handled cases with the poise expected of her. Yet every decision, every ruling, was informed by a quiet memory of the laughter that had once stripped her bare. Her moment came sooner than anyone expected. A case appeared before her docket, one that sent a thrill of anticipation and horror through her at once. The defendants were two of the very officers who had forced her into that degrading moment. They were now facing charges of corruption, abuse of power, and civil rights violations for multiple cases, the culmination of years of mismanagement and reckless arrogance. Nia listened to the opening arguments with a face of professional detachment, but inside, her mind replayed every cruel laugh, every mocking glance, every snip of her hair. And as she looked at them sitting in the defendant's box, the question that had haunted her years ago returned with sharper clarity. Could she remain the impartial judge she swore to be, or would the memory of their cruelty bend the scales of justice in ways no one could predict? The courtroom was a cathedral of silence and tension. The gavel's echo had always been a sound of authority, but now it was the drumbeat of anticipation, each strike a countdown to justice. Nia sat behind the bench, the black robe hanging heavy on her shoulders, a symbol of the very power she had sought for so long. Her gaze swept over the officers, Men who had once thought themselves untouchable, now reduced to anxious figures waiting for a reckoning they could not escape. The trial opened, and witnesses were called one by one. Stories poured out like a torrent of evidence, tales of misconduct, abuse, and intimidation that these officers had inflicted on countless people, not just Nia. Each testimony strengthened the case, each revelation another nail in the coffin of their arrogance. Nia maintained her composure, letting the proceedings unfold with meticulous attention, her silence carrying the weight of unspoken judgment. The officers shifted uneasily in their seats, glancing at each other, sensing the undercurrent they could not name. When it came time for closing statements, Nia stood. Her voice, calm yet authoritative, filled the room. She recounted the evidence, the testimonies, and the severity of the crimes, each word deliberate, each sentence a measure of poetic justice. The men who had laughed at her in the station looked up, panic beginning to cloud their features as the reality of their fate became undeniable. They were no longer laughing. The room, once full of the echoes of mocking voices, was silent, hanging on every word as she laid bare the consequences of their actions. As she passed sentence, the power of the moment settled over her like a tide. The men would face years of accountability, stripped of the impunity they had once assumed was theirs by right. And in that moment, Nia felt a surge of something that was neither vengeance nor victory, but the quiet affirmation of justice restored. The courtroom remained hushed, every eye on her, every ear attuned to the gravity of the moment. When the gavel struck for the final time, it was not just the sound of the law being enforced, but the echo of a lifetime of resilience, of a dignity reclaimed. As the officers were led away, Nia stepped down from the bench, walking past them with measured calm. The memory of the scissors, the laughter, the humiliation, all of it now belonged to the past, contained within the power of justice rather than rage. The question that had once threatened to unsettle her had been answered, not by bitterness, but by the realization that true strength lay in patience, in strategy, and in rising above the cruelty imposed by others. And as she left the courtroom, Nia knew that while the world may remember the laughter that once echoed through a police station, history would now remember the silence that fell when a woman finally stood as both witness and arbiter of her own destiny.